Alright, so on to step 4, we need to develop a process for randomly selecting rows. So the goal here is to randomly generate numbers. We need two numbers. We want to be able to select specific rows in the table, which is our temp table called names, which we created in step 2 here. We want to be able to randomly select the value from each one of those two rows based on the randomly generated numbers and pull those out into variables. And then we want to do a little bit of testing to make sure that we're actually generating random first name, last name pairs, and then just kind of do some refreshes to make sure that things are actually working correctly. Correctly. I also have a typo there. All right, so how do we go about doing this? Well, first of all, we're going to need to declare probably some sort of first name RDM, random number integer, and then we'll also need a last name random integer as well. So those will be our variables for holding those random numbers that we generate. Now, when I started working on this, I was trying to find the best way to generate a random number, and I'll kind of just show you a little bit here. So first name RDM equals, there's a rand function, and rand is supposed to generate a number, so we'll print first name RDM, just so you can kind of see how this all works. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that and just run. I get a 0, get a 0, get a 0, get a 0, and it kept coming back with 0. So then I was like, okay, maybe it's a floating point value, right? So I start getting decimals, and they vary somewhat significantly. I said, okay, I can deal with that. So then I said, well, what if I take it and I multiply it by 100, right? And so then I started getting decent sized numbers. And then I started thinking, well, how do I keep them within the scope of the number of rows I have? And then I realized what I could do is I could say, I could use a mod, and we have 20 rows. So I take this number, I randomly generate a number, multiply it by 100 to get an actual real number, and then mod it by 20, and I ended up getting data type floats are incompatible with the modulo operator. So then I was using floor to just grab the integer version of that, which still didn't work. So then I had to do a cast of the floored value as an integer, and then I started getting random numbers, which was pretty good. So I said, okay, so that's my formula, right? So then I need to also generate my last name random number. And that should get me where I need to go. So refresh. And things were looking pretty good. But you'll notice in there that things really aren't that random. And we even end up with some overlap of the first two numbers, but you'll see a lot of the same numbers just popping up over and over again. And with enough refreshes, we get uniques. Well, without going through all the logistics, what ended up happening is that because the database engine runs so quickly, this random number is generated off of the number of ticks or seconds that the server has been running. And because it runs so quickly, it can do a lot of computations and attempt to generate a lot of random numbers within 1 second when it's not me highlighting this and then hitting F5 a whole bunch. Because obviously it's doing hundreds of computations per milliseconds. Long story short, it wasn't actually generating unique first name last name combinations. I'd end up with about 10 or 20 or even 100 records with all the same first and last name combination, because the random number it was generating was actually not random. It was the same. So I started Googling, and I came across an article that was talking about how we could, instead of using the cast floor rand multiplication type of approach, they actually recommended using the absolute, checksum, and new ID to generate what we're looking for. So I'm going to paste this in here just so you can see it. So I'm calling new ID. And if you're not familiar with what new ID is, I'll just do select new ID here and I'll run it. And it generates a GUID. Okay, and that GUID is completely different every time, and every time it generates a GUID, it's going to be completely different. So even if it's generating hundreds or thousands of them a second, it'll never generate the same one twice. So I said, okay, that sounds good. So then it takes that and it puts a checksum around it, and computing a checksum of that GUID. So that turns out to be a pretty interesting, big number as well. So it varies, and you have positives and negatives. It's all over the place. So then ABS is an absolute. So you always end up with a positive. So even if it's negative, it multiplies it by -1, makes it positive. And then the last thing is then to take a mod of 20 of that, and basically it tries to find how many times they can divide 20 into that number, and then it generates a valid number. Now these numbers will go between 0 and 19. It'll never get to 20. We don't want 0 and we want 20, so we have to then wrap it one more time and say +1. And that will then generate numbers between 1 and 20. So this is actually our algorithm for generating random numbers between 1 and 20. And if we do this, get rid of all that. And if we do this twice, we get, considering we only have 20 options, we get a pretty good mix of stuff. And this works really well when it's running hundreds of computations per second. So, step 1 done. We can now generate random numbers. So let's go ahead and grab this and move it up here. And that will be our work of generating our random numbers. Now we need to be able to capture first and last name based off of those random numbers. So let me actually bring this back down here and let's keep working. Now what we're wanting is we want to be able to select the top one first name, right, from hash names. So if we do the top one, that always pulls back no, and it just gives us one result. And so that's pretty good for what we're looking for. But when we actually end up with a random number, I'm going to change these to selects, just so we can look at everything in the same kind of scope. We want the 7th one, not the first one. So to do that, we have to skip the first 6 and grab the 7th. So to do that, we have to do something kind of unique. We have to say where, and this is actually a subquery approach, where the first name is not in, and then we're going to select the top, and this is going to be the top random number -1 is what we want. So first name RDM -1. First name from names. So we want to grab the first 6 names, and we want to grab, and so we're going to take those first 6 and we're basically saying grab the first name from names where the first name is not the 6 prior to it. Now, I tried to run this the first time as well, so let's highlight all this. I ran this the first time and it said incorrect syntax error near your first name RDM. So in order to use a variable in SQL Server, starting in SQL 2005, you actually have to wrap this computation in parentheses. And when you wrap it in parentheses and you run it, this needs to be an integer. Oops. Int. It will actually grab the appropriate value. So let's go ahead and run this again. And you'll notice this is the first one, therefore it grabbed Noah. This is 19, so it grabbed Benjamin. 20, Harper. 4, Olivia. 6, Sophia. Ava. Over and over and over, and we're getting uniques each time. Now this number is obviously shifting and changing, but we're ending up with getting something that corresponds to that particular row. So that then gives us our first name. So if we copy this and then replace everywhere where it says first name with last name, first name, last name, last name, and this is last name random. We highlight and run. We now have Ava Johnson, Noah White, Michael Thomas, James Thomas, Alexander Brown, Olivia Williams, Noah Smith, Noah Martinez, Michael Brown, Emma Smith, and we're getting those unique combinations of first and last name. Now, if we had more to choose from, if we made our temp table of names larger, then obviously we get more unique combinations. We're only working with 20, so they're not going to be that unique. But that gets us where we need to be. So from here, then, we'd actually just need to declare two more variables. So we're going to declare first name. We can just call it first name. That'll be a varchar of, let's say, 50, which is probably more than enough. And then we'll declare last name as another varchar of 50. And these two variables will then capture the first and last name value. So to capture it, we're going to do at first name equals and at last name equals. So when these queries run, instead of them spitting out the results, it'll actually take that value of that property, it'll take the value of that field and put it in the variable. So you see it did not actually output anything. So we can get rid of that, and then if we do select first name plus last name, and we run all of this together again, we now begin generating names. So that's the functionality for randomly generating the numbers and then selecting the appropriate row based on what randomly generated number we have. So that'll give us our result set. So we can now use that in our final step of combining and creating unique results.